Good afternoon, everybody. We are Test Analysis Group 8, which involves Caitlin Black, Morgan Hart, Jessica Wiggins, and Daniel Wolf. And today our test is the Test of Written Language, the 4th edition, or the TOWL 4. So some general information about the TOWL 4. It was made by Donald D. Hamill and Stephen C. Larson. The publisher was from ProEd. And the copyright year for the 4th edition was in 2009. It is used for children ages 9 through 17, 11, and so or normed for grades 4 through 11. And there are two test forms, A and B. All right, the purpose of this test is to identify students who have problems in writing and to determine the degree of the problem. It is used to identify students who write poorly and need special help, determine a student's strengths and weaknesses, document a student's progress in special writing programs or in therapy, and it serves as a measurement tool in writing research. The dimensions and constructs the test is purported to measure. So it measures the expressive form of written language. Excuse me. The TOWL 4 addresses three components of writing. The conventional component, which involves punctuation and spelling. The linguistic component, which involves the grammatic and semantic content of the written material. And the cognitive component, which involves the ability to write logical, coherent, and contextual material. So there are 7 subtests for this test, for the TOWL 4. The vocabulary subtest, which gives the examinee a stimulus word, and the child has to write a sentence using that word. The spelling subtest, which requires the examinee to write sentences using proper spelling rules. Punctuation subtest, so the student is instructed to write sentences from dictation using proper punctuation and capitalization rules. Logical sentences, so the student is given illogical sentences and they have to form them into a logical sentence. That makes sense. Sentence combining is they're given short, choppy sentences and they combine the sentences to one longer one. And the contextual convention subtest, the client is asked to write a story in response to a stimulus picture, and it includes the use of specific arbitrary requirements relative to orthographic and grammatical conventions. And last but not least, the story composition subtest, which reviews the quality of the composition of subtests 6 and 7. So they're given a picture and they have to write about this picture, essentially. The test was normed on 2,205 demographically represented individuals in 17 states. So the way the states were separated was the West region, South region, the Midwest, and the Northeast. And the ages for all the children who the test was normed on were 9 through 17. And the normative data was collected throughout 2006 and 2007 using the 2005 consensus. And as you can see in the photo, there's a whole bunch of demographic information, including gender, ethnicity, whether they're Hispanic or not, household income, and the educational attainment of the parents.
Okay, so for the computation of scores, you will record your scores onto the TOWL 4's protocol, and the name of this protocol is the Record Story Scoring Form, and it consists of 7 sections. So that's identifying information, subtest performance, composite performance, descriptive terms, story scoring, administration conditions, and interpretation and recommendations. So for the identifying information, you will place important information or relevant information about the examinee in this section, so their gender, their age, what school they attend, and then some identifying information about yourself, so your title, where the test was taken, etc. For the subtest performance section of the protocol, you would record the examinee's raw score, percentile ranks, scaled scores, and descriptive terms that correlate to that scaled score. So you record this raw scores first, and then you convert it to normative scores based on their age and grade. So you can find age equivalents in Appendix A and then grade equivalents in Appendix B. The descriptive terms that can be located on Section 4 of the protocol. So for the composite performance, that's just the scale scores from the previous section, and they're recorded in this portion, and they're combined to create 3 composites: an overall writing, contrived writing, and spontaneous writing score. These scores are placed into the sum of scales oval, and then they're provided in this section. Those sums are then converted into a composite index and percentile ranks, and they are found in Appendix C. And then you would use the descriptive terms that are found in Section 4 to obtain the corresponding descriptive term for the examinee's composite index score. For the descriptive terms, again, they are in Section 4 of the protocol, and they are terms that are ranging from very poor to very superior. For the story scoring section, the examinee scores are from the two spontaneous subtests of contextual conventions and story composition. And then in the administrating conditions portion of the protocol, you just provide information in this part about the testing conditions and if there were any factors in the environment that may have impacted the examinee's results on the test. And then for the interpretations and recommendations, you just easily write some notes or concerns you may have about the results, or if you have any recommendations for further assessment or any ideas for intervention. Okay, so for the interpretations of scores, the TOWL yields 5 types of scores, and that is age and grade equivalence, which is provided for students in the norm section, in the norm sample, and then you would just convert the subtest raw scores to age equivalence, and again, that's in Appendix D. You would get percentile ranks, which are just the representation of a value on a scale of 100, and that determines the percentage of distribution that is equal to or below the value. For age and grade based subtest scale scores, that's the scale scores that have a mean of 10 and a standard deviation of 3. Again, scale scores for each student are located in Appendix B, and then for grade equivalence, that's in age equivalence is Appendix A, and grade equivalence is in Appendix B. And then for the composite indexes, you will get 3 forms for contrived writing, spontaneous writing, and overall writing. And then these indexes estimate the examinee's general writing ability. So for the TOWL reliability, they did a few things to determine the reliability of the TOWL. And first they did the coefficient alpha, and that it just looked at how the test items correspond to each other. So 4 of the 6 subtests were at 0.90 or higher, but when all alphas were calculated, the coefficients averaged to approximately 0.80 or higher, and that's within good standing. For alternate forms immediate, it determined the errors that may occur without any alternate test form because of content sampling, and the results yielded a correlation and a relationship amongst Form A and Form B of the TOWL, and it was above 0.80. For test-retest reliability, it looks at the examinee's performance and make sure that it's constant over time. So you administer the test and then administer it again a week or 2 later, and then the similarity of scores administered from the first and second administration determines how reliable the test is. So for the test 4, it was deemed to be at a desirable level of reliability. For alternate forms with delayed administration, this estimates the test error in regard to time and content sampling, and it's assessed using grade-based and age-based norms. So 9 coefficients were calculated to be approximately 0.80 or above, and the coefficients for spontaneous writing were too low to be deemed reliable when using grade-based norms. For score reliability, it was 0.90 for all subtests except the story composition, which was 0.80, so it was still good, so therefore score reliability was acceptable. So overall, this test has high reliability across the 5 types of reliabilities listed, suggesting that examiners can have confidence in test results and that this assessment has little test error. And for validity, they use content description validity, criterion prediction validity, and construct identification validity. For content description validity, the test proved to achieve the required criterion of 0.3 or higher in mostly all subtests, and the percentage of average percentages of difficulty associated with age and grade were within acceptable limits. The logistic regression procedure was done to assess bias, and it determined that the TOWL is within acceptable limits. For criterion prediction validity, the criterion measures that were compared to the TOWL to determine criterion prediction validity were the written language observation scales, reading observation skills, and the test of reading comprehension. The results indicated that the correlation between the tests were mostly large or very large, and that proves that the TOEFL has good criterion prediction validity. And lastly, for construct identification validity, it was the TOEFL was compared to composite scores of the comprehensive test of nonverbal intelligence and with the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, the 4th edition. The relationship between the TOEFL and the other two assessments were deemed as either moderate or large. So overall, the TOEFL is a valid measure to assess writing, and examiners can administer this test with confidence.
So practically speaking, the test would take about 60 to 90 minutes to administer, and it can be administered to both a group or an individual, although it is usually administered to an individual. The examiner should have some formal training and assessment and be knowledgeable about the rules that govern the English language, aka an SLP. And the manual provides exact directions and scripts, so it has a script that you can follow exactly, and it has that for each subtest when you give the directions to the student. The only portion of this test that is timed is going to be the story composition subtest. This test does have to be hand scored. There is no computer scoring available, and the scoring, although we touched on it a little bit earlier with the protocol, the guidelines follow. So it provides guidelines to score responses as correct or incorrect, and it also provides checklists and rating scales depending on the subtest. The manual is overall very helpful without being too lengthy, so it has all the information that you need, but it's not one of those huge manuals that you pull out for a test. And it's very informative, very straightforward, not a lot that you have to try to decipher. This test can be stopped and continued later if there's time constraints or if the student begins to fatigue, which we all know is a great feature with tests because it's definitely not available with all of them. It provides assessment on multiple areas of writing, so it doesn't just look at one thing. Can the student compose a story? It looks at writing as a whole and throughout different areas of the subtest. It can be administered to a group. The manual mentioned that this may be done for research purposes, but as I mentioned before, it's usually going to be done measured on an individual. And it does have 2 separate forms, which could be good for test retest, and that's helpful when you're using it to use as like a benchmark type assessment. One of the weaknesses, which could be a strength or a weakness depending on the student and how you look at it, is that, as we mentioned, all but one subtest are not timed. So this could be a strength in that it could take less than 60 to 90 minutes, but based on the severity of the student's writing disabilities, that may take longer than 90 minutes. So it kind of is hard to gauge how long it will actually take. And the scoring, although does have guidelines on what's incorrect and what's correct, as this is writing, the student can create any response that they want, so there may be a little bit of a gray area when scoring. Overall, we felt that this test is going to be a pretty great assessment because it has good reliability and validity. It's pretty straightforward, it's easy to use, and it does look at multiple areas involved with writing. So we would recommend using this test and felt that it would be a nice assessment to look at an adolescent's writing abilities. And this is our reference.
Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.